Go ahead, Tara.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tara Boy-Mooney, and I've just actually submitted the research that I've been working on for the last few years, with a little break in the middle. And it's basically, it's an intervention-based study, and it looks at clothing as areas of importance for people living with dementia. So I guess I'll start. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, I'm just going to go for it then. Okay, so it's called The Map of Me, and it's a journey of lived experience through garments, focusing on personhood and sense of self. And really, the context would be that dementia, the prevalence of dementia is huge in the world, and it's rising. It's at 50 million and is set to be 152 million by 2050, which is huge. And many people with dementia live at home or are cared for by primary carers, or live in care facilities with trained staff, and there is no cure. So with the strains and profound changes experienced by people living with dementia and their carers and family members, often it's the sense of self and the interrelationship which suffers. And the study really is an exploration into the effectiveness of a forward intervention, which looks at these interrelationships. And as garments and clothing are sites of the self, and dress is one of our daily habits, I'm looking at this particular area. Also, in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, this research has, I think, become even more important. So the questions are, to what extent might the inherent sensory nature of garments be used to build a non-pharmacological intervention, which would excavate the lived experience of people living with dementia, and then how through triggering memory and shared storytelling, sense of self and personhood can be explored. So the methods that I've used, it sits obviously within a qualitative tradition, and it is a hybrid, as you can see. So we have theoretical underpinnings drawn primarily from the fields of empathic co-design, along with overlapping knowledge domains, such as sustainable textiles and fashion, people living with dementia and their carers, narrative inquiry used to draw out small stories of co-presence and co-tellership, bearing witness to people's lived experience. This is all supported by an extensive use of drawing as a method. So I use drawing in two ways. Firstly, to represent missing elements which were excavated in word, but not physically. And then also as a way to physically map moments of personhood through garments onto a kind of a map of life. And then we had the ideas of personhood, which were brought forward by Kitwood and also Ulrich Neisser, for 5 interpersonal aspects of self are adopted as an initial structure upon which personhood and sense of self can then be mapped. And this was all merged with best practice nursing research methods from experiential nursing, and that's been developed by Dewar and Nolan, and again going back to Tom Kitwood. So I also really at the heart of the thesis, I will say that the heart of the thesis is that the person living with dementia is at the heart of their own ecosystem, and everybody lives at the heart of their own ecosystem. And in the context of this research, a personal ecosystem is an ensemble of objects, relationships, and elements specific to the individual within the context of their environment. So that draws on work by Kitwood, who talks of ecologies of care, and Kate Fletcher, who talks about ecology when she discusses the life cycles of garments. So really, you can see from the image there that the person is at the center and all of these various elements surround them. So I have worked on 3 case studies over this research period. Each of these 3 people had mid-stage dementia, and I was working with their primary carers as well. And I chose to work with people with early to mid-stage dementia while there was still a capacity to recall and engage with each, with the interrelationships and engage in storytelling. So this meant that moments of personhood were often consciously captured through the garments of significance. And then at a later stage, they were recalled and shared. And this all fed into reinforcing sense of self. The participants were introduced to objects from their personal family archives, triggering their own creative and imaginative responses to their past and present lives. Again, enabling co-construction of lived experience, interrelationship, and it often means that there's then a repository for an intervention for the future. So this is an image of the map of me, the journey through lived experience. Now it basically it's constructed from information that comes from a person's running sense of themselves through time. So you're looking at selfhood as constructed from the idem identity, or that which is always the same, or the ipse identity, that which is changeable. So this person, say on the left, wearing the school uniform, in that moment, the sense of self is that person, but the person at the end of the life experience, as the grandmother looks back on that person, and that person still exists within the overall journey of lived experience. And this has been, this I've drawn a lot on Ricoeur and Northoff and Wagner, who then attempt to bridge this gap between personhood and identity with a lovely thing called habit. And so your sense of identity with habit allows you to move backwards and forwards through time. So there's a link between conscious intent and habitual action. And there you have the diachronic and synchronic timescales merging. And this is very fast to be running through this. It's obviously a lot more complex, but basically garments support all of this. So I have my 3 case studies here. This is the first one, co-creating sense of self. And this is working with garments, a mother and her 2 daughters working with garments that they created over 20 years ago together, and reliving the experience of that. We have mutual tagging between garment and guardian. This is really interesting because the woman in question lost one of her main garments of significance, and we created a label together. We co-created the label, which then tagged the garment with the woman, and the woman was tagged with herself was tagged with her own garment. So it gave the garment an equal status, basically, so that the garment, if it was lost, could be returned immediately. And then the third case study was it emerged that patterns of personhood were revealed through a color. So the shoes that you see in the center there were given to this woman when she was 8 years of age. And for the rest of her life, she used the color red for all of the primary events of her life. So to conclude, really, there were a number of areas, obviously, that came through as being really important, and those would be that it was essential that all of these workshops were held in a very safe space. The identification and collation, or if you like, curation and excavation of garments of significance was a really important aspect. And that was all done by everybody in the cohort, focusing on the garments rather than the person living with dementia. Sorry. Was a way to enter the world of the person living with dementia and their primary care, and it enabled interrelationship where previously there may have been some issues around stress or dress. Then the interpersonal elements where interrelationship was strengthened through co-tellership and co-presence, again, all focusing on the garments. Creative gifting and receiving through storytelling of lived experience. And then finally, this idea of placing memory, time, and space within the lived experience of the participants as defined by their own memory of their own lived experience. And that often meant that it was not a linear timeline. I'd just like to add that. And I'm finished. I hope that made sense to you. I'd be absolutely delighted to receive some questions. It's kind of challenging to bring a full thesis down to 10 minutes. So I was also delighted to be given the challenge. Now.
Yeah, I think this is a really good opportunity, especially because you already submitted. So please, anyone, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I have a question. It's a pretty easy question to answer. But did you illustrate your PowerPoint? Were these drawings that you did?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The drawing really has been a very important part of the whole process, because the drawing enabled hidden ideas to come through subconsciously. I was doing a lot of drawing during the sessions as well, so that all of the illustrations have come from that. A lot of the methods have been developed from drawing. So that was a really wonderful outcome, yes.
And so when you first did your PhD, did you have a background in art and drawing, or was this something that you developed throughout the course of you studying?
I would have a background, yeah, as an artist, but I did not enter. I did not enter into doing the PhD with that in mind as an area that I would go down. No, it happened very much as part of the process as I was doing the doctorate. Yeah.
I would say I think we all experience that. I told you earlier on how much my project has changed. So it's interesting how you had that as well. And it's also really nice how you were able to incorporate pieces of you into your research by being the artist that you are. I have another question as far as collecting your case studies. I wasn't sure. What year did you collect your case studies? Was it impacted by the pandemic at all, or did you already collect all that beforehand?
No, I had collected the case studies, and I had done all of that workshop research and process before the pandemic. So really, it was interesting because a lot of the elements of the research are very relevant for the pandemic, and have become even more relevant. Yeah. So it would not have been possible to have done the research during the pandemic.
Right. Well, it's good news that you were able to get it beforehand before anything.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because if this kind of forward intervention is introduced while someone is still living at home, then there's an automatic transferal of their ecosystem from their home into the care home. And that's a really important part of this research. One of the most important outcomes is to literally transplant the person with their objet d'importance, you know, with the elements of their life, and the transplantation will be more fruitful as a result.
Mm-hmm. We do have a lot of questions coming up now, so I'll just go ahead and read one of them out to you. This one's from Clare. It says, do you think your drawing accessed something of your unconscious or subconscious?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was struggling with a lot of the concepts around personhood and sense of self. And then I was also struggling with areas around the body and nonverbal communication. And drawing enabled me to subconsciously actually address a lot of these issues that were coming up in the research. They made a lot of things clear. Yeah, so absolutely, yes. Yeah, a really powerful tool for me. And I don't think it's necessary for someone else to take over the map of me process. I don't think it would be necessary for them to be able to draw because there are many, many elements. But for me, drawing was really essential for the actual research process.
I do have another question from Vicki. It says, where did the idea come from for your thesis? It's a wonderful topic to study.
Okay. Okay, so my master's was in sustainable fashion, and I realized pretty quickly that even within sustainable fashion, we're creating too many things. So I wanted to look at garments as repositories of value to try and encourage less consumption of garments. So I'm coming from sustainable fashion with that question. And I then looked at people's relationships to specific cherished garments. And I ended up doing a whole master's called Diary of Our Daily Threads, which focused on garments and textiles that had been gifted to people by people who had passed away. So the garment was a physical connection to that person. And that's where the research began. It was it was an effective way of recalling both recalling the relationship, but also an effective way of highlighting the value in certain garments and highlighting textiles within that. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does answer the question, and it just goes to show you how you can get inspired by one thing and it just develops into something more than what you could have ever possibly imagined. And I think it's interesting that you came from like the fashion area of things, and it's just developed into what it is today.
Yeah. Well, I was working in China as well. And,
oh wow!
Yeah, and I was working in the industry, and I was very close to a lot of pollution, and I was also very aware of labor laws. And then, of course, I was highly attuned to the fact that collections were being produced 3 times a year. And the collections were not really perceived as having value because they were garments that you can just buy on the high street. So that's where the question actually started. And within fashion, it's really hard to find meaning sometimes. So looking at value was a way of kind of maybe extending the time scale of a garment. Once you start to look at its experience with a human or, you know, a guardian of some sort, you're looking at it more as a repository than just a piece of cloth or sheet of cloth.
I could definitely see it working like that, just kind of being like a signpost to a memory.
Yeah.
And it's more than just, you know, garments. Like it could be a blanket even, you know. I think a lot of us had baby blankets, you know.
Yeah.
Baby blankets are a big one. We do have another question. This one is from Catherine. It says, can I ask you about your ethics approval? Did you find it difficult due to the potential cognitive impairment and consent?
Yes, it was a very lengthy process, Catherine. And I ended up doing informed consent, which is also continuous. So I got consent from all of the participants before I got it at the end also. So anybody, and then I've given people the opportunity to withdraw, obviously, at any point. But that's how I addressed consent. Ongoing consent means that even with cognitive decline, people still have the opportunity to consent or withdraw, depending on, you know, on what they want themselves.
Sorry about that. I just realized I put myself on mute.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I was talking and then I realized, sorry about that. I do have another question. You're getting lots of questions, which is great because this is great practice for you. It says from Brenda, really interesting to see how your project developed. Were there common types of garments coming through?
That is an interesting question. I would say not really with these 3 case studies. Not really. The same types of garments weren't really coming through, but a lot of very similar emotional attachments were coming through. So garments, there was one type of garment that actually that came through on all 3, and that was a christening gown.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of an obvious one because that's often passed down through generations. But the more gritty, interesting garments were actually garments that the participants themselves had worn at key moments of their life journey. Yeah. So they were important. They were important not because of the type of garment, but they were important because of what they symbolized.
Yeah. I do see, Rachel, your hand is up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more, and I think you touched on it, on sort of your decision to frame things, sort of the relationships between people, garments, etc., as ecologies and ecosystems, rather than, I suppose, talking about sort of actors and objects or networks.
Oh, right, yeah. I think it's really important that we return to more organic ways of viewing the world. I've found Donella Meadows, I'm not sure if you've come across her, and her kind of systems theories really interesting. And I've also looked quite a lot of biomimicry. And I think that part of the issues that we're experiencing on multiple levels around disenfranchisement of people and ecological collapse are because we're moving further away from the most basic system, which is the ecosystem. And in saying that, each ecosystem will always interact with the ecosystem around it to create a larger ecosystem. So it was very important that for me that I constantly touch back to nature and return to nature. Also, I was working in very sterile environments, and this whole thesis is about moving away from sterility and bringing back people's relationships and objects that they are in contact with every day. And part of that sits with agency as well. The agency to be able to pick something up, you know, that's in your ecosystem, like make yourself a cup of tea or empty your own garbage bin. These tiny things that are intimate moments of care and sit within our lives, sit within all of our lives as habit. And so ecology is, for me, where everything begins. And we have removed ourselves from ecology. We have, you know, more and more moved away from nature, and we have a lot of problems because of that. So that's why this research is situated in there.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, overall, I feel like this has been a really productive conversation, and I certainly learned a lot from your research.
I'm also,
Go ahead.
I was just saying that I'm really happy to answer any questions. If Catherine wants to email me, I'm happy for you to pass her email on to me, because if she's entering into the ethics minefield, it took about 1.5 years for me. So it's you know, it's a huge area, but it's really worth doing well. So I'm happy to have a chat with you about that if you want, Catherine. You know,
that would be great, Tara. Thank you very much. That's much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Excellent. So yeah, we can go ahead and share the email. I can share the emails in the chat box. That's not a problem. But at this time, we're just going to go ahead and wrap up with you, Tara. I really do appreciate you taking the time to share us your work. And Ross just joined, so hopefully he didn't get a sneak preview of your work. And our next speaker today is Constantinos. And Constantinos, you're welcome to just go ahead and take the floor here.
Hello, everybody. Can anyone hear me?
Hello, yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay, I'm Constantinos,
So,
and
if you're not comfortable, please make sure you keep your camera off and you can use the chat box to communicate with me while I'm doing my presentation.
Okay, someone's playing the YouTube video. Can you stop playing the YouTube video?
I just started my second year, so I don't really have much as far as data goes and like analysis of that, but I did just complete my methodology section, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit today and then talk about some of my literature.
Hi, sorry. Somebody was playing the YouTube video over top of Constantinos, so I just went ahead
Creative practice.
and muted everyone.
God, I'm so sorry. Okay.
All right, Constantinos, you can go ahead and keep presenting. Sorry, I have you on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
okay, so hopefully you can see my slide. Everybody can hear me, and can I start?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, no worries, no worries. Okay, everybody, I'm Constantinos, and basically I'm going to talk to you about my thesis, which is, you know, I'm hopefully going to hand it in a month's time or something like that. I'm closing up in the end. And it's about waged labor through the philosophy of George Bataille. And what actually waged labor does to us and how we are to think about it on the level of selfhood. So it's quite close to what Tara spoke about earlier. Bataille, basically, his philosophy is about a century old. I mean, he grew up during the First World War. He lived through the Great Depression and the Second World War, and the sort of exaltation and optimism that came after those two wars. So basically, the era that he wrote of more or less is close to what we are experiencing today. We've had gone through some financial crisis. We're now going through this COVID thing, so a lot of parallels are to be drawn there. So what I'm hoping to do today is, in the 10 minutes that I have, to sort of compress his philosophy and its relation to labor. But I sort of cut through a lot of fields. He wrote a lot on philosophy. He had a keen interest on history. He wrote about a lot on cave art and art in general. There are light slices of pornography throughout his works. But essentially what he wrote, and he puts it in this way, that it is a writing that it's supposed to make meaning during the end times, where the end times, he means the times where things have become fully autonomous. So there are big parallels to draw there in relation to labors, which now we are entering an era where the world of work is characterized by precarity. Our work is quantified. We are always, measured by machines and managed by machines. We do not actually produce things, but we produce ideas, which, as soon as we sort of give birth to them, they are appropriated by neoliberalism and put to productive use. So Bataille urges us to think of work as a meaningless play, as an activity that it is an end in itself, and not an activity that it's supposed to be always productive, always geared towards growth. I drew a lot from the work of Mark Fisher, which characterizes our era as an era that neoliberalism has expanded so much that we cannot actually think outside it. I mean, we may try to pretend that we go outside the technology or outside the sort of benefits that modern life has given us, but we do not really. We only, make pretend that we are outside it. And but I exactly expressed this same idea that we have moved away from nature and there is no returning back to it. The only path that we are allowed to think of is forward. And the path that Bataille traces for us is, I have seen it on religious terms, as a path towards the sacred. Moving on, I sort of drew a lot from the methodology that I used. Centers a lot on the self. I used a strand of methodology called post-qualitative research methodology, which is basically in contrast to more dedicated forms of and methods that we use. It sort of does not isolate ourselves as researchers from the thing that we are researching. One has to write in his own blood, as Bataille puts it. So we do not actually observe and write, but we take part. We are affected and we affect the cosmos that we inhabit. Parallel to his, this is something that has evaded most literature that deals with Bataille, because quite frankly, he was quite peculiar. I mean, he actually, most people treat him metaphorically, whilst Bataille did talk about things that are, quite uncomfortable, to be honest with you. I mean, he talked about human sacrifice. He talked about sort of slicing one's throat at the point of climax. He talked about consuming totally. But these are things that he actually tried to do, and he failed at it. On the left, I have a tree where Bataille, he sort of parallel to his written work, he had founded the College of Sociology, which was disseminating his research, as we can say. And parallel to that, he was running a secret society, the secret society of Acéphale, which under that tree, the initiation rite he tried to perform was actually human sacrifice that went wrong, but nevertheless, he did try it. In a nutshell, the ideas that he sort of introduces and we are to think our existence towards is the idea of headlessness, the lack of leadership or calculating reason, which means this, I use it to blend the political thought that Bataille introduces with the managerial. Is everybody with me?
I think everyone's with you. It's a very philosophical discussion.
Yes, I know. I will try to put it on simple words. The idea of headlessness is like the idea that groups should exist without leaders. Every person should be autonomous and his own leader. That was the political sort of arm of this strand. But if we view it from a labor perspective and from a sort of managerial perspective, is that capitalism is the fascism of production, meaning that capitalism does not valorize waste, whilst does not valorize consumption. But I had this, what he called the general theory of things, which actually he said that the cosmos is a heliocentric universe where the sun provides energy in abundance. And the problem that humanity has, it's a problem that it is geared always towards growth and never consumption. And he placed, and this is a big debate that's currently going around, centrally around post-humanist circles. We view humanity or anthropos as problematic in that, we have destroyed the rivers, we have destroyed everything. But they brings out a different view of humanity, not as primary, the primacy of the human species, but as privileged. But they urges us to think that humanity is the only sort of species that has been privileged to be able to consume beyond sustenance and bare needs. Also, this carries along to his ethics. He went beyond the bifurcation between good and evil, right and wrong, and he saw the sacred as being one. And in that line of thought, he based his whole philosophy on transgression. I mean, what is prohibited is a marker for Bataille that is where the sacred is, and that is where we must go. So, in a sense, it's a philosophy that allows us to sort of bring together the fact that neoliberalism has expanded to everything, but we can exist within it as transgressive individuals and, not outside it. He gives some very brutal examples on, but actually, he didn't break up the sacred in good and evil. He didn't break up transgression or pleasure in great or big. He saw transgression as always within our reach and always accessible to everybody. It's not that we try to succeed in something, is that the sort of thought that animates our actions is what matters. I had a couple of examples to give to you. I will give you a short one. For example, we are all academics, so we all write. One of the things that we write on is the table. He thought about it and he said that an act of distraction is when you put aside your papers and pens and typewriters and computers, I don't know what everybody uses, and you set a glass of water, or a glass of wine, forgive me, on the table. By doing that, not only you destroy the labor that you will have produced, but you also destroy the labor that went in making the table, and you are subverting its use. And to close up, and I guess you will have questions, he sort of distinguished between distraction and disappearance. Distraction is what happens to matter, to things. Disappearance is what happens to us as living humans. So his idea of total consumption extended to that, you should consume and enjoy everything. And this, at its very, 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 very core, is brought down to the self. You, at the final end, you also need to consume yourself, which in short is resolved by the figure of the beloved, which is a figure that he uses, that the beloved is the only sort of figure that lures us into also destroying ourselves as a positive, productive individual and framing ourselves as an individual of joy, which I feed to something that I call negative production, which is, his work essentially affectates us towards not production, but consumption. I think this is about it. Questions, please.
Yes, go ahead and ask your questions, raise your hands. Constantinos, from what I understand, you have a background in, you worked as a designer for employment consultant. Now,
basically, like everyone else, my project really changed from what it began. Combining my two professions, as a designer and as an employment consultant, I sort of, when I started, I wanted to find out a way on how to represent unemployed people, which was a problem that I had in my line of work, because when I was looking at people, I was not actually looking at people, but a set of data. And I wanted to see if through the use of avatars, like 3D representations and stuff like that, if I could convey some personal qualities of the person that I am supposed to match to a job. I mean, if he's pleasant, if they are, a happy person, if they are secondary qualities that you could not read from, a big printout of data that came to me, dealing with, the typical CVs that we see. But as I progressed, I sort of, this idea became unethical to me, because what I referred to before, everything is geared towards growth. What I would have done was not an avatar of the actual person, but an avatar of the actual person as they were supposed to shape themselves so that they would be considered productive. So, yeah, that's about it, if it answers your question.
Yes, it does. Does anybody have questions? Please pop them in the chat for me. Just seeing if we have anything else popping in at the moment. We don't. Ross, did you have any questions?
Yeah, well, we can't see Constantinos. Is there?
Oh.
Here I am.
Oh, that's better. It was all looking a bit...
yeah, sorry about that.
Yes. Constantinos, can you just recap, what was your central research question?
Well, my central research question is, what does Bataille's philosophy tell us about labor, how we're to conceive what we think about labor in the now, and at the same time, what did actually Bataille say to us? Because his texts, they are quite not difficult to read, but they are very poetic, if I may use this word. I mean, yeah, difficult to approach in an academic framework. Yes.
So to sum up, if you had to compress,
sum up, everything is.
What did you find that no one else has found?
Well, it is an answer towards the posthuman question, that is that we have geared all of our progress in towards more growth, and we have geared all of our progress in a growth that is effective towards us, whilst we should, Bataille, what he brings to us is that we should split up, let the machine, it's a very, very old sort of saying that people have been dealing with. We should split the machines to do the brute production, and we should do the consumption at the level that everybody is able to do it. Which in the area that I work on unemployment, it gives us what happens to unemployment now universally is what we call an active sort of policy, which means people, they are not, we do not encounter them on the level of humanity, but we help them so that they become workers, which in turn equates the human to the worker. Bataille opens up towards a more kind, that we should support people to be what they are, regardless of how productive they would be as workers, that there is a sort of basic level of humanity that we need to tend to, regardless of whether that level is productive or not. I think that sums up the central idea.
Yeah, thank you. Has Rachel got a question?
Yes, I read it through the chat. Which is the best reference to refer to Bataille's ideas of headlessness? Well, there are two books that you may turn to. It's the Accursed Share, which everybody reads through, where he, narrates his thoughts on headlessness. And also, I think it's the psychological structure of fascism, short text that he brings forth this idea of headless groups.
What was the first one?
The Accursed Share, and also, if you want a more compressed version, he has a small essay which is called the Psychological Structure of Fascism, which sort of points towards headlessness.
Okay, thank you. My question was actually, that was just a reference, but what drew you to Bataille's work in the first place?
I wrote a book chapter, which it's about to be published now, on how we are to frame the zombie figure as the wage laborer, and how everything is geared towards maintenance, how everything is geared to persevere, that we are afraid that things will break down and stuff like that. And there I became acquainted with the work of Achille Mbembe. Mbembe wrote on the concept of necropolitics, which essentially deals with actual bodily death that happens during labor. I mean, people that actually, work in precarious conditions, they work themselves to death. And he referred a lot to Bataille, and essentially what I'm looking now is how we move this concept from the actual bodily death to the sort of spiritual death that we are currently going through. Yep. So Achille Mbembe led me to Bataille.
Thank you.
We do have another question in the chat from Tara. It says, what colored Bataille's philosophy on the meaningless of play? In other words, labor as meaningless play.
This you can read through if you read one of the people that worked very closely with Bataille, Roger Kay-Lewis, who sort of wrote about the distinction between what constitutes a game and what constitutes a play. Play is something that the child does that it's, sort of meaningless. He pretends or she pretends that, she's a pilot, an airplane or something like that, but there is no end goal. They just enjoy the moment. A game, on the contrary, is something that has a goal. You have to win. There is a victory condition. And this is the distinction that is brought onto the world of labor as well. And Bataille does talk about it in reference to cave paintings in prehistoric art, that the first actually paintings that humanity drew, they didn't have any gainful purpose. They just drew for the joy of it. They actually drew to communicate to other fellow human beings. So he frames this play as an equivalent of communication, and then he links that to eroticism, which again he links to communication. Yep.
That's really interesting. I don't really know much about Bataille, so it's really good to see that you're very devoted and knowledgeable. We have another question from Claire. It says, does it touch on Jung?
I will be honest with you, I have no idea. I did not really read, haven't read anything on Jung, so I cannot answer that, Claire, sorry.
No, I mean, I think it's different because Bataille seems more of like a philosopher, whereas Jung is more of like a psychologist. So I mean, there might be overlaps.
There's also a lot of work that's been done on play theory.
Yeah.
The importance of play and what it does. A tremendous amount of work, actually, on that. And I think it was a misunderstanding earlier on to dismiss play as frivolous, that it served no purpose. But we've come to understand now it's essential to human development, exploring our roles, how we interact with other people, the consequences.
Precisely. I mean,
yeah.
If I can expand on that, basically what we have seen is that the play area or the play world is something that doesn't have the rules that we go by in our everyday lives. So we are free to explore. And the way Bataille puts it is that what happens and what gets created inside the play world affects the real world and not the other way around. So it's something like a rich field that we go to take things and bring back to our everyday lives and enrich them.
But actually, play does have rules, and children know those rules. And if you break those rules, they are very quick to tell you. So if you break disbelief, they will pull you up on it. Or, there are set boundaries, that are shared rules.
The difference is that children, they make their own rules and they are free to drop them, and they do not receive a set of rules. And this is very linked to the autonomy of the self. That Castoriadis wrote a lot about this, is that in his definition of the autonomous individual, it's the person that makes up. He doesn't go around destroying everything, but he's the person that makes up a set of rules that he recognizes as of himself or of themselves. So I guess ideas that run parallel.
Shared games can have fixed rules, that we all have to abide by. But that's interesting. No, it's yeah. Right. Have we come to the end of the questions? Oh, another one.
Yep, I see another one here from Rachel. It says, do you deal with sites of labor in your research, such as how many workers have to now work from home, and do the boundaries between work and home and leisure are blurred?
Only as secondary, because I have sort of finished it, just before the pandemic cut in. So, but following you, now the situation has changed, but we don't really know. I mean, it's just the site that it's changing, and it's. I don't think it's very. You may debate me on this one. I'm not sure if that's my take. Is that the problem is not exactly where we work. The problem is whether we internalize the fact that we work for someone else and not for ourselves. Whether we, internalize waged labor as a condition that asks us to leave parts of ourselves outside. I don't know if this answers your question, but That's how I think about it. So it's not an actual question of sight, but it's an actual question of our internality, our how do we perceive what this thing, this 8 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours that we cut out of our lives does to us.
You haven't submitted yet, have you?
I'm doing the final cleanups, and probably I will submit hopefully next month or something like that. I don't know.
I think Rachel's point is a good one. I think certainly you would need to acknowledge the pandemic, given that you are submitting in a time of pandemic, and maybe it might have in your implications for future study and so forth.
Yes, some bits happen in the footnotes, but yeah, I'll bring them up.
Definitely. Otherwise, examiners would question that probably. Okay, look, fantastic. I need to say that this is our second last for this academic year. And Madison, this is Madison's second last at hosting with us and organising. So next month we want to be able to celebrate that as well. I think would be fitting, don't you?
Yeah, we can bring the wine.
bring the wine.
Yeah.
No expense spared. And we'll, of course, be doing this virtually again. But if we don't get a full complement of speakers, I think we'll open